Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. This is Radio Free Mormon on the air, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Tonight's episode: Mormon women turn up the heat on church leaders. Today's date is May 7th, 2024, and there has been an explosive piece released today in the Salt Lake Tribune regarding certain comments made by the president of the Relief Society, Camille Johnson, this past Friday as part of the BYU Women's Conference. And what she said was that although she had had a career as a corporate attorney, she was nevertheless encouraging the other women in the church to stay home and take care of their kids. I think that's basically what her message amounted to. It will be quoted here in this article, and we'll put this up on the screen here so we can all take a look at it. Here we go. LDS women to church leaders. When did the rules about women working outside the home change? Thousands take to the church's Instagram to decry what they describe as mixed messaging regarding mothers pursuing careers. There's a picture of Relief Society President Camille Johnson speaking on Friday at Brigham Young University's Women's Conference. She's the leader of the Global Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and she explained that even though she worked outside the home, let me re-emphasize that. She explained that even though she worked outside the home, her priority has always been motherhood. This is an article written by Tamara Kimsley of the Salt Lake Tribune. As I said, it came out today on May 7th, 2024, and I could not wait to get online and share this article with you. For the second time in less than 2 months, Latter-day Saint women have taken to social media to push back against an address delivered by a top female church leader. You'll remember the first top church female leader that was pushed back against was Sister J. Annette Dennis and her comments about she doesn't know any church that gives more power and authority to women than the LDS church. Yeah, that got a hue and cry for a response from the women in the church. This is the second one now. Speaking on Friday at Brigham Young University's Women's Conference, President Camille Johnson, leader of the Global Relief Society of, say it with me, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, encouraged women to rely on the words of President Russell M. Nelson and emphasized the need for women to prioritize motherhood. My primary orientation, that is, my focus, passion, and calling as a woman, is toward motherhood, Johnson, a former corporate lawyer, said. That is our primary orientation, our sacred calling as daughters of heavenly parents, to be corporate attorneys. No, wait, I think she's talking about motherhood there. The Salt Lake Tribune submitted questions to a church spokesperson for the 60-year-old Johnson. And those questions were including how she and her husband managed childcare while they both worked, and her advice for Latter-day Saint women interested in pursuing a career, but who feel guilty for doing so. No responses were provided. Wow. Just wow. Really? No responses at all? Let them eat cake? Is that what we're going to have now? I had babies, Johnson said. Camille Johnson. I had babies, and my husband and I loved and nurtured them while we were both working. Actually, I think she means when they came home from working. Johnson told her worldwide audience Friday. It was busy, sometimes hectic. We were stretched and sometimes tired. I supported him, and he supported me. Family was and still is our top priority. Senior Apostle Dallin Oaks, Nelson's top counselor in the governing First Presidency and next in line to lead the 17.2 million member faith, spoke on similar themes in a 2023 devotional, i.e. last year. The 91-year-old father of 6, that's Elder Oaks, warned young single adults against delaying marriage and childbearing, even for financial reasons. He was among the first to comment on the church's Instagram post, quoting Johnson's talk, calling the Relief Society president a wonderful role model. Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what he thought of her. And here he is at that devotional with his wife, giving that advice to the young adults of the church. Some commenters, however, worried the call to prioritize motherhood could leave women particularly vulnerable to financial insecurity. Here's one of the comments. Approaching 40, I have seen enough faithful LDS women abandoned by their husbands and left to care for their children, all with weak educational degrees, starting from scratch and barely scraping by, wrote Annie Mengelson. Too many women and children end up in absolute crisis, having simply followed the prophet. We have to quit teaching like this and setting some women up for failure. And as many commenters pointed out, President Johnson, that's Camille Johnson's own decision to pursue a career conflicted with previous prophetic counsel, discouraging women from work that took them away from their husbands and children. I'm grateful for this message and example, said user JS Smileybug. However, I'm 25, and this is the very first time I've ever, all caps, first time I've ever heard a church leader suggest it's acceptable for mothers to work outside the home. Now we get to the part of the article, what Kimball and Benson said. That would be President Spencer W. Kimball and President Ezra Taft Benson, leaders and presidents of the church in the 1970s and 1980s. There's a picture of the two of them together. Some of the more than 2,000 comments pointed to the words of former President Spencer W. Kimball, spoken in 1977 and shared a decade later during a Brigham Young University fireside by then President Ezra Taft Benson, as the kind of clear direction Johnson would have heard and not heeded. Here's the quote: "No career approaches in importance that of wife, homemaker, mother. Cooking meals, washing dishes, making beds for one's precious husband and children." Benson quoted Kimball as saying, "Come home, wives, to your husbands. Make home a heaven for them. Come home, wives, to your children, born and unborn." I'm not sure how you come home to an unborn child, but nevertheless, the sentiment is obvious. Several Instagram commenters cited rhetoric like this as their own reason for forfeiting careers and instead having children sooner than they otherwise would have. Decisions some said they now regretted. To have President Camille Johnson, who chose otherwise, now lauded as a role model, they said was painful to watch. One user, Oils for Us, wrote that she was in the audience when Benson delivered his dramatic address. Taking the message to heart, she said, she proceeded to give birth to 3 children in 3 years. That's what women did who followed the prophetic teachings back in the 70s and 80s, and up to the present, actually. I used to get the BYU Alumni magazine, and every time I'd cry and feel sad because where was my paragraph, she wrote. Where were my accolades for having done what Benson instructed? Seeing President Camille Johnson praised now, she said, brought back that same ache. The women, she said, who went against the prophet's very direct counsel get their paragraphs and fulfillment of becoming something else and a mom. Neither was the impact of such rhetoric constrained to a single generation. I'm sobbing reading this, commented the 35-year-old Linda Hamilton, not to be confused with Sada Khanna, who in an interview with the Tribune said she gave up her dream of becoming a writer to devote herself to her family. These days, she mourns for younger me. She gave up all her dreams and ambitions because she truly thought God would only accept her if she obeyed the prophets exactly. Well, that's what we're taught in Mormonism, isn't it? That we are only acceptable to God if we obey the words of his prophets with exactness. And here is the trademark for the Salt Lake Tribune. And a note here to the audience: subscribe to the Mormon Land newsletter and also subscribe to the Salt Lake Tribune. Get the latest news by subscribing to our Mormon Land newsletter. Enter your email below to receive more stories like these right to your inbox. Continuing with the story. It's not that Hamilton, who lives in Southern California, doesn't want the church to celebrate working women. Rather, she wishes Camille Johnson and other church leaders would acknowledge that doing so represents a major break from the past. Hamilton is hardly alone. The next section is called The Right Thing to Do. And here is a picture of Relief Society General President Camille Johnson speaking at the European Union Parliament in Brussels in March 2024 on religious liberty for women. This would have been an even more beautiful message if it was coupled with an apology Wrote Area Bethards, to all the women who listened to President Benson and other prophets who pressured women into letting go of education and career dreams to stay home as housewives. Others, meanwhile, didn't seem to know what to think in response to the talk. I'm starting to feel so confused, wrote, I'm not sure how to pronounce this. I'm going to say Jamie and Ellen. I'm starting to feel so confused. On the one hand, I'm so happy that Camille Johnson listened to her own intuition and authority to make decisions for her life. But I know someone who was not given a temple recommend because they chose to work instead of stay at home at the time. It's so unfair. I don't get it. Still, others saw in the sermon an opportunity to emphasize the importance of following Johnson's example and carving one's own path. Let this celebratory post of a woman in the church choosing to go against the brethren, another commenter wrote, edge of inside, let this stand as a shining example to the rest of us that following our own personal revelation and authority will always be the right thing to do. The comments are reminiscent of the more than 13,000 responses engendered by a church Instagram post from late March, quoting a sermon by President Johnson's first counselor, J. Annette Dennis. In her speech and the associated post, Dennis stated, there is no other religious organization in the world that I know of that has so broadly given power and authority to women. The women represented in the comments were less convinced, arguing that their experience in the patriarchal faith did not align with Dennis's description. So there we are. That's the end of that article. This is going to be a relatively short podcast. I wanted to make sure that the news got out regarding this article and that the women in the church are becoming more and more vocal against attempts by leaders of the church, in this case, two female leaders in the church, to try and gaslight them or change everything without ever having announced that a change was made in order to get them to think that actually, yeah, they could have done this all along, just the way President Camille Johnson did. But I guess they listened to the prophets instead of following their own intuition and following their own desires, their own dreams, their own revelation, regardless of what the prophet said. And even if it was in direct contradiction to what the prophet said. Now the women who contradicted the prophets have gone on, gotten careers, and many of them are now in positions of church leadership and being heralded and extolled as examples for women in the church to follow. This is part of the confusion that's going on with this mixed messaging, and part of the reason that it is eliciting such a widespread vocal response from Mormon women who are beginning to rise up and say, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, that's about all for tonight. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. This is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.